Okay. It's Monday, November 18th, 2019. We're in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, and we're here to talk about full spectrum paintings, drawings, and prints of Julian Stanczak and wood and stone sculptures of Barbara Stanczak, which is going to close here in about a week or so. So I'm here with Barbara. I'm Neil Rector.
I'm Barbara.
So
I belong to Julian, or belonged.
And belong to yourself as well as the artist.
Okay.
So Barbara, the first question I really want to ask you, as you walk in and see the show and see the work and you see the title, tell me what are some thoughts that come to your mind about this exhibition?
I like the title. It's your title, your words, but it encompasses a wholeness, a fullness, full. And spectrum, is it color? Is it light? Is it two-dimensional? Is it three-dimensional? It embraces fully a spectrum of activities. So it works.
What about the exhibition itself? What are some of your thoughts about the exhibition?
I like that Julian's work shines as fresh as the day it was made. And Julian and I, in our life together, we always had the doors open. We always stepped into one another's studio. It was always an exchange, what he did and projected, what I did and projected. So the closeness of our ideas was wonderful and rewarding. The material execution is totally different, but that's what makes you respect the other and delight in seeing his work become reality. So it worked perfectly and very enriching. And to see both Julian's and my work together means a lot, because not only occupies the walls, but it occupies and the mind, but it occupies the hands, the senses, and the center of the rooms. And I like that.
I know when the museum first talked with you about the show, one of the ideas that they considered was having a show of Julian's work in some of the rooms and a show of your work in other rooms. And I think it was really your idea or your suggestion to them to try to put it together. And of course, once we see it together, it's really just a magical fit.
It sort of
just a magical
belongs together.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of which, one of the things I'd like to talk about first is this series of stone sculptures that you have, this kind of garden, and then, against this backdrop of paintings of Julian's. So kind of your thoughts on the juxtaposition on this work?
I brought this in, or I selected it, because I'm sad. There's no more orange translucent alabaster in Mexico available. So it is something that is relatively easy to carve, but that is now the veins are run out. So I'm sad, but I'm glad that I still had, these are 3 inches of the vein that I could still use, but then became smaller and smaller and more dirt within it, and more stones and crystals within it. When you work this orange alabaster, the veins go, this thick, and it's encrusted in white crystal. So the first thing is you have to dig it out. I left some of the crystal part.
So when you actually buy this, you've got the crystal on the outside of it. Okay.
About half an inch of crystal to chip away.
On each side.
Before you even can see what you have.
Oh, really?
And
so when you buy the stone,
it's
it's just this white crystal, and you're hoping that there's going to be
that there's red inside, and how much red.
Yep.
And as you see, there's some holes or indentations there usually in order to get rid of mud veins.
Yep.
So you start with a technical problem.
Yep.
And you hope that the decisions that you have to make technically, that you can incorporate them visually and conceptually.
Yep.
That's always a tough part. I said, this is not one of my best pieces, because it is still pieces. I like it, as Julian would say, when it melts down, it becomes totally one.
Yep.
inseparable.
Right.
That you cannot move away anything without hurting the totality.
Yep.
That is the aim.
Yep.
But not always can you can come close, but
Yep.
not always do you totally succeed.
One of the things that's interesting for me.
Can you see it from the other side?
Yep. One of the things that's kind of interesting for me, Barbara, the way you've described it, is that we were talking about this, you're sad because this is the last of this
Yeah,
stone from
yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, when they think of sculpture or whatever, they don't really realize that the scarcity of materials is a really big part of what, of your practice. I know when we gave the talk here at the museum here at Fort Wayne some time ago, a woman in the audience approached me to approach you afterwards, saying she was cutting down a tree and wanted to know if you wanted to have some wood to use. And you're saying, that's very generous, but I'd have to let it age for
5 years.
5 or 6 years.
An inch per year.
Yep.
So if it's a big one, there are many years. And
Yep.
how many years do I have to wait?
Yeah, that's even before you can start carving
plan.
it.
Yeah.
Or this, I mean, where you're getting the stone, you don't even really know what's inside of it until you start with it.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I said many of these passages were originally just getting the mud out.
Yep.
But then you have to think of form and
Yep.
totality.
Yep.
I think the two bigger pieces are quite nice, but quite beautiful.
Yep.
In their softnesses, in their rise and dwelling. The little pieces, again, they're more, I have those little ones left. I want to keep them together.
And to do something
So,
with them.
yeah, that's really what
Well,
it
what's
is.
also interesting, too, is you're putting your fingers through it. You want people to touch your sculptures.
Absolutely, because if you cannot see,
Right.
then you have to feel it.
Right.
Because I have to feel the stones thousands of times.
Right.
It is all file work.
Yep.
There are no tools, no mechanical tools. It's all filing and handwork, touching.
Yep.
Yes, your eye is the final judge, but your hand knows particular rightness
Yep.
of form.
Yep.
And so it comes together, body and mind.
Yep. Do you, were you involved in any way in selecting the placement of the work
No,
in the show?
not at all.
So there was an initial selection of paintings of Julian and your work that was sent to Fort Wayne. And then the curators here were the ones who decided ultimately what subset of that was to be exhibited, and then also the placement. Any guesses? I mean, I'm curious as to your thoughts of the placement of this work in this surround.
Well, it picks up the yellows and oranges in these 4 paintings.
Yep.
So the warms,
Yep.
in comparison to that corner that is cool, it wants to be warm. And then the black and white one is a shock.
Yep.
So the relationship was very nicely chosen all around.
Yep.
So I'm happy to see that sensitivity and a certain love affair to the materials and the understanding of the work or the drama of the work.
Yep. I know obviously a lot of artists talk about things in warms and cool senses, the way you just did, but I also know from my knowledge of Julian's work and my knowledge of you and your work over the years too. I think that sense of warmness, of coolness is something that's of particular importance to really
Because
to both
it's
of
a
you.
psychological reaction.
Yeah.
It is not any more intellectual, but you feel warmth. When
Yep.
you look at that painting, I mean,
Right.
you almost feel hot.
Yeah. Well, and that painting is titled Desert Hue.
Yeah,
So it has that feeling.
Julian
and that-
reacted to that
to the
very
desert.
much too.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Barbara, as you gave me several things to look at and make a decision, 2 pieces quickly came to mind as being my personal favorites. And watching the audience interact also with the exhibit and with the pieces, this was a piece that people immediately responded to in a very strong way, both to the finish, to the positive space, to the negative space, to the roughness of these edges, and how you managed to keep those edges, and yet there is such contrast to the fine finish on the face of the piece and on the back of the piece. So I thought, this is it. And I thought, no, I have to go see my other favorite.
Well, let me talk about this one
Please do.
for a sec. I go scavenging, and most of the things I work on, the stones and the wood, I either find or I see it in a tree and I wait until I get that piece up there, or I go to lumber yards and look at the cut-offs that they're throwing away and try to salvage something that responds to me. So I know this kind of wood. It is not Lingus vitae, what is it? Osage orange, which has, when you cut it, it is yellow and it has a very, very strong striation. So I wanted to keep that. Matter of fact, I put a little bit of yellow on the edges in order to keep it from aging, patinaing, and getting brown. I wanted that orange in there naturally with the brown on the outside. It took only probably 2 days to make. When I want to have the cutouts, I drilled the holes, I cut it out with the saber saw, and it worked. On a very, very simple base, easy to take out, manipulate. So sometimes the idea is crystal clear. Sometimes it's labor intensive and you go for months. But there is something to the speed or the clarity of thought. Yes, it is very total. It stands by itself. It costs nothing. So
but
there
it's
is
such a
something
complicated form too,
well,
that you move so
I
quickly.
very much worked
and you
with
knew.
the grains. Many of the forms are echoes of the lines that are there.
It's a gorgeous piece.
That one was very, 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 sorry. Come on, there's the dirt in it. Labor intensive. Because these are elm trees, and they're at least 40 years old. So the wood is harder than the alabaster stones. Very,
I didn't
very
realize
hard.
that.
And there's no saw that can cut it, so each one took me a week to saw in half before you can saw other pieces out of it, or chisel these pieces out. So I had the idea of this configuration after I cut them in half, because I can't lift them as a whole, so they're both practical and material consideration. And I did want color. I wanted both sides to be very different. On the back side, it's yellow or very light color, similar to the wood color. Well, here you have the contrast. And one is a color that absorbs the light, even though orange glows, but it is not glossy. So I wanted the light to penetrate in. And this has a lot of mixtures of mica, so it has some iridescence, and applied with a palette knife, it looks alive. It doesn't look dead and flat. So it echoes the outside that is roughly chiseled. And again, the negative spaces are important,
And
and
your
how
color
the color
shifts
variation,
as we
it
go
gets
up.
lighter
Gets
and lighter. Yeah.
Even though the wood, I'm certain, doesn't get any lighter.
No, no.
No.
And to balance that, because you try to put these pieces on before you have those ones totally permanent, and those things fall on your feet.
I could tell it was a labor of love.
Yes,
certainly.
it was
Not as easy to do.
A stubbornness to, I want to see it, I want to do it, I want to carry it through.
Of course, when we installed the show, the issue was that this was a part. So I needed to be put together so I can see it. And everybody says, tell us where you want to put it.
Oh, yeah, because I
we don't
want to
do it
move
twice. I think,
Yeah.
all right, at least get a few people and hold it in the air for me. And I thought, I know, it's got to go right here.
Perfect.
And I love it right here. It's echoed with the circles around and the circular form in the stone. This is the piece I would love. If you would like us to have that, we would love to have it.
I will think about it.
Okay,
Okay.
very good.
Okay, good. Well, the artist wants to be seen. You want to share. Why do you struggle if it is not to make somebody else happy, to see something in it? So the sharing is very important.
And to have it seen a lot.
Yeah, that's
That's-
very important.
That's what matters to me.
Okay, okay. Works for me.
Thank you.
So we'll talk about it. Okay?
All right. Hi, I'm Charles Shepard. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of this museum and its president, but I'm also its head curator. And this is a show that meant something to me more than a year before Barbara and I even got serious about the discussion. I just really wanted a major exhibition that would focus on this couple of artists and the very different work, but the very related work that they make. I knew it had such integrity, but I also knew that it would have such strong appeal for our audiences, and it has. We've seen more people come for this show than shows for the last 2 and 3 years. It is, a great wonder for us, a great delight for us, and a great delight for our audiences. So thank you very much, Barbara.
Well, you're welcome. The pleasure is mine or ours. And sorry, I'm still thinking in terms of ours because Julian and I are so close and we're so
It's
close
only
and
natural.
continue to be close.
Absolutely.
So love his work to be seen and shared. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Barbara, a few minutes ago we were talking about how warmth and cool, those concepts are really important to you and were really important to Julian because it really deals with psychological. And you're pointing out this painting and the warmth of this painting titled Desert Hue. Do you have any recollection of when it was made, kind of the ideas behind it?
Don't ask me for dates,
Yeah,
but I remember its glow.
Yep.
It's almost haunting, and it's unusual. Usually, Julian measured the size of the inside to be 1/3 of the totality. Here it is taking 2/3.
The inside meaning
The
kind of
inside,
that central glow.
the central glow. It's
Yep.
such a big burst, and the steps are so fast and so containing,
Yep.
so abrupt almost. So it bulges, it glows, it illuminates, it's alive. It's unusual, it's different.
When you said that, I'm sorry, you said that normally the inside is what? You said
About 1/3.
1/3?
Yeah.
Oh.
And here it's 2/3.
Yeah.
And that spread of light is beautiful and powerful.
Yep.
And again, it's very, very complex because it has mixtures from yellow to dark red. Then it has the mixtures from the greens to the deep blues. Then it has the mixtures of the yellows to the
different dark
red
red,
medium.
right, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it has 3 times 8 colors, 24 colors in harmony. And again, Julian always spoke about metamorphosis and how things how the paint and the divisions have to melt down to become oblivious or inseparable. They're just so far part of the totality that you cannot move a thing. You cannot eliminate one row. You cannot. It would not work to the extent that it's working now. You cannot make it bigger. It's just perfect. So this meltdown of color relationships, and again here it's a triad of 3 different color mixtures.
Working in tandem.
Working
or
in harmony.
In threes.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yep.
So it's unusual and it's powerful and unique.
Yep.
If you look at the one next to it,
Yep.
that's a print, but it's unusual that he inverted it. Usually it's the light in the center
Gotta
that comes out, and here it's the dark in the center and the light on the frame. So it creates a hole instead of an extrusion. And it's so the printing was absolutely amazing. 1/32 of an inch lines to be printed.
Yep. And with those color shifts too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
not just printed.
Yeah.
With,
Julian
yeah.
would mix the colors
Yeah.
in all the printers, but the technical expertise that he required can drive anybody nuts.
Yeah. One of the
Because
things
it's demanding so
Yep.
much.
One of the things interesting to me about the way this exhibition was hung relative to Julian's work is that the curators did seem to have pockets of, like, we're going to have a series of warms and a series of cools. Is that, do you, when you hang installations, do you tend to do that as well, or do you tend to want to have, you know, juxtapositions?
It depends on the space.
Okay.
It totally depends in your relationship to that space and to that movement.
Yep.
That the corner is here.
Yep.
You need to do something to bring us around.
Yep.
So at every space, there's no right way or wrong way, but I
Yep.
like what they did here.
Yep.
And if we shortly want to look at this one.
Sure.
Again, yes, it has the color progressions. With a simple doving of the two, but there are so many layers of colors. The blues change, the grays change, the pinks, purples change, the yellows to dark purple change. And the taping is unusual, that he taped, I know physically how he taped it, overlapping one layer, leaving the intersection instead of leaving the border.
Yep.
And this.
Yep.
And you have these crosses sparkling, and these ones almost turn around while the crosses insist in being crosses. So if you stand a little bit away, you have dots and crosses, dots and crosses. Very interesting beat that it sets up.
Yep. So Barbara, you know, over there you talked about that kind of excavation, the darkness going in, and this one obviously has that same kind of going in, but with a very different distribution.
Very, very different. Your dark pulls you into the back, but the yellow doesn't allow you to go there, so it becomes more insistent coming forward. So the wanting to go in and the push back forward, this duality, this netting, the see-through screen that is created with the yellows is ultimately dramatic and powerful and pouncing. It's like piano music.
You know, one of the things that's always amazed me about this painting, and there were 2 or 3, I think, from the same, you know, with different color variations but similar, but these edges are almost like you know, like the light mirrors that people would have. I mean, they just kind of, on the edges, just seem to have that light that glows.
Well, that's, I will not say a trick, it's a
Right.
great sensitivity to color relationships. Here you have contrast, here you have lack of contrast.
Yep.
Value relationships are extremely important to how we read shape, or when we lose shape and see color priority, or the haze or the atmosphere. This is atmosphere.
Yep.
This is shape and pounce.
So here, these would have, even though they're different colors, they've got a similar
they're-
value
they're-
relationship.
yes,
So that what
that's
you're really
right. All
noticing,
three,
and particularly with
those
these being
values.
on the periphery
Yeah,
of the canvas, that you're looking in the center, and as
Yeah.
you're looking out in the periphery, your periphery sees that.
that
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 haze that
haze.
comes.
uh-huh,
Yeah.
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 Now,
And obviously-
value is so important.
And obviously a very
Uh-huh.
different thing, which we've been talking about as a black and white painting, but it isn't black and white, it's purple.
Yeah,
I mean,
pur-
it's
uh-huh.
purple
But
in
it's
this.
a dark value purple.
But the center squares are less dark value. I mean,
yeah,
they're more purple.
the gradient is from black to gray to dark gray
Yep.
to light to dark. So it can bulge. If you step away, you have this framing, bulging unit with the center going in deep and then making the star formation to go out to the corners again. And it is so big, you want to enter it. You want to be part of it. It's like a passageway. And yet it's so dark and repulsive at the same time. And yes, it's a dark purple. Julian never took anything from the cans. The black is not from the can or from the tube. The purple has a particular mix of value that he wanted. And it also goes from reddish purple to bluish purple. So you have to study it from close to really discover all the choices he made.
Yep. Barbara, a painting like this one, or the one that's 2 over that has the doved things that you're talking about, those from a distance have a shape aspect to them, a shape kind of orientation as well as the color. The other ones that we talked about, the desert hue, the print, and then this one, don't have the same kind of shape orientations. Be curious your thoughts on shape versus non-shape in Julian's work.
Julian loved more or reacted more to pure color, but like this one, really, like that one, pure color, harmony. But he thought it's more difficult for people to understand because intrinsically the first thing a child learns to identify is the shape. I know the table, I know the chair, I know my fork. It's shape-oriented. We all are first primarily shape-oriented. Julian wanted to be a colorist, so color is more precious to him than shape. And whenever he was able to lose the shape and let the color dominate, he was very happy. But you have, as he always said, you have to contain the color into something, into a form. So the duality between shape priority and form priority or color priority, it's always one time one wins out, one time the other wins out, but he loved the color to prevail in everything.
I'm curious, so you're talking about Julian preferring just kind of straight color, but actually, end up doing things, shape in essence too, because people are shape oriented.
And also he has to contain different color relationships.
Right. Yep.
When he wants to make the spatial folds, they need to be precisely contained and weighed in order to go into space or do something that you want to do on that canvas.
Yep.
But
I'm curious from your perspective, because you've seen, you've gone to virtually every show Julian ever had,
I
and,
did.
And all that.
I did.
And you're very observant in watching people and seeing how they react to the work. Was Julian's perception and concern correct? Were people focused more on shape-oriented work? Did people understand the color?
Yes,
the color first
absolutely.
or not?
I think what people remember of him most are the transparencies, the transparent folds, the ribbons that unfold in space on the canvas, that have a certain logic to them, or at least they can re-experience them. For me, it's always the fun when they're illogical, because you fight with what you think ought to happen and it doesn't happen. So you have a different kind of duality. But I think those paintings from the 60s and early 70s, those are the ones that people remember most and seem to identify with, feel comfortable with, because they can enter it not only with emotion but with understanding of what is happening there. It's how to make rhyme and reason for most people. They don't know why they react the way they react and what they see and why they see it that way. Okay, speaking of transparency, this is also glowing yellow, same yellows and oranges. Yellow, the high key in the middle, framed and contained on the edges. And we think that there are two flaps with perhaps a central diagonal shift or shape in the middle. It is logical. We can re-experience it. We are puzzled when it comes to intersections like this. Which one is in front? Is it going in? I thought it was a solid plane. Why is this moving, but how is it affixed? We try to figure out. Our reasoning, our head, often goes contrary to our seeing. Since we know part of it, we force our vision to see what we want, what we understand. And
and this one, the one next to it, I find even more, I guess, illogical, maybe the word, or contra-logic. This one I have even a harder time creating mentally a shape out of it than this one, even though they're...
both of them are quite logical, because you can continue the shapes. Uh-oh, I didn't know it has a crack like that. Yeah. Anyhow, you can follow the different shapes overlapping in space. Some of them are connected at a point and swivel and shift, but they are logical, and the step progression from the purple and blue goes to the purple and yellow on the outside. So you have the the light change. And again, not many paintings have the darker center.
Yep.
But it's such a soft changes, such an intricate mixing that he's using here. Very, very
talk a little bit about the color mixing process. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I know it typically was powdered paint, right? Powdered pigment that would get.
No, not for these.
Not for these?
For the early works, those
Okay.
are in powders.
Okay.
This is acrylic.
Acrylic, yep. But he would mix it. He would have to mix it because it didn't come straight out of the.
He didn't like the artificial colors. He might use a yellow, these they come in different tubes, but he would give them body.
Yep.
That's the main thing.
And what do you mean by that?
Yellows or
No, what do you
and
mean by
reds,
giving them body? Yep.
He would mix mica, pumice, baby powder, stone, marble grindings. He would have about 10 different dishes besides the color pot. If you would take it from the tube or from the pot, you would have to make 20 coats in order to make it solid, even color. So by giving it body, it is easier to apply. It becomes denser. He can control the luminosity. Look how dull this is. He didn't want always
Dull
this,
meaning non-glossy. I mean
non-glossy.
Matte.
Yeah,
Matte.
yeah.
Yep.
So he could control that, especially with the different, again, powders that he used. Much, much more control. And that's him.
Yeah. So I mean, I know he would do the color mixing when he had all the different baby food jars. I mean, I've seen thousands of those over the years.
Yeah.
But then he would create the color strips with kind of the things down. Would he normally be able to just put the color strips together and then envision what it would look like?
Yeah.
Even though it would change radically once you actually apply it to the surface?
He would wait till it dries. He puts them in the outside light. He puts them in the inside light. He puts them in the warm light. He puts them in the cool light.
Yep.
And watches that the relationship is correct to what he wants, or what he imagined, what he saw up there before he even began.
Because it's interesting, in most instances, or in many instances, it would almost need just two color strips, or when I say just two, but you'd have two color strips because you're seeing how because colors would almost always operate in pairs. But we were talking about with Desert Hue and some other paintings, they're really operating as threes or as even 4 layers of color, 4 different colors at the same time, and having to make sure those 3s or those 4s move in equal steps collectively.
There are many more watchings than just that, because he would make sure, he would have on the color strips, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors of the different purple, okay? And compare it with the darker maroon to the yellow, and see what they do next to one another, if they overlap with a clean edge. Are they active, are they not active? Which one goes into space, because here this is much darker than the neighboring color. Here the purple becomes darker. And so the relationship to that, plus the relationship within a shape. You have your 5 equidistant steps, like going a step, you are establishing a rhythm. But then he would go back and make the central step less. Because since it is almost always isolated, it would pop out. It would be either too yellow and jump out, or here too purple and jump out. The last step had to be intensified, so in order to cut off, to contain. So there are so many adjustments that he was aware of to get you to see it the way he wanted to see it to be seen. Many little adjustments that only come through the knowledge and watching, the science in it, these variations that he went through.
Barbara, in translating, your work obviously is quite different than Julian's in many ways, but certainly has a lot of affinities, the two bodies of work. How did you deal with those concepts of transparencies, with those concepts of stepping, with the things we've just talked about? Is there any work in the show of yours that would be interesting to discuss in relation to those concepts?
Not really. It starts with material first, and having
For your work.
for my
Yep,
work, and
yep.
having the respect of the material, knowing the material inside out, what you can do, what you can't do. There are already so many given limitations that are also experiential and selective, and you pile on experience upon experience. But no, not. Julian had different priorities in the colors. I loved colors, but Julian always said, "You're not a colorist, you're shape-oriented, stick with your shapes." So painful as that might be, it's the truth. I react more to shape, but I love color. I react psychologically to the color, but I'm not as sensitive as he to make those choices. Now, fixing his paintings, yes. Very easy to understand the shapes and to see the major divisions, but that's only part of it. It's not anymore the shape divisions that are so easy, but the richness of colors, how the blue and the yellow-orange work with the green and the other orange in the tiny line. The tempo, timing was very important for Julian. What you see first, what you see second, what you see third, what when you step away, what you see when you are close. This discovery to hold your time and attention in there, they're just gorgeous to see each time.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting also to me about this is because of the diagonal nature of it. The squares are, but they're also then cut through. In terms of the shape orientation steps are different. I mean, they cut through. Normally, it would be right at the edge. It would be a complete square would be one color, and then the edge of it would shift to a different one. But here you've got
the action of the diagonal and
within the shifting.
Well, Julian always identified most with the vertical line.
Yep.
Just line, and he said that's my body equilibrium. I'm vertical. We assume that verticality and measure ourselves in relationship to it. The squares are different psychologically, but he said they're the easiest to bring to a rest because it has the vertical and the horizontal, and they meet at a point. So he always felt I can create an equilibrium so that we can forget about them and put color inside. If you look at the painting right behind you, the green and blue one, it's just color suspended somewhere, somehow, and it's the intersection of the vertical and horizontal. So we identify body and spirit, both elements of receiving elements are in there.
Yep.
Okay, this piece, again, I'm a little bit attached to because because it's the remnants of one of my oak trees. The only piece I saved, 2 pieces. The other one is also at home. So it's my tree, and I love trees, and we had to cut it down because it would fall on our roof. So I kept a piece, and it's a big, heavy piece. I came to it, I selected it, and then came with a chainsaw, one of the few things I was strong enough still to hold that chainsaw and start cutting it. Also, since it was fresh cut, it started splitting, and I wanted to hold on to that whole unit as one piece. But, for example, all the main cuts are cracks. So how do you make the cracks be part of a totality? There's always a technical problem. The materials are not easy. So how do you make it a whole? How do you keep what you wanted and make the rhythms of forms need one another to be complete and echo and are rich as you are walking around? And I painted it because that's probably the only one, very few sculptures that I paint. But again, the oak tree having such a rough fiber cracks very easy, speckled very easy. But so I had to use some speckling paste to make it smoother, to keep the cracks from cracking farther. So then it's not any more beautiful wood. So I painted it. But the foam, I like what happened to it. And it has this little kink in it. It reminded me of the Gothic Madonnas that always have that hip sticking out. So that's where the Gothic comes in.
Yeah.
So.
Tell me about the choices in terms of the bases for these. You make the bases,
well,
you or Julian did. Julian made a lot
Julian
of the bases
did
too.
many bases for me.
Yep.
It is on wheels.
Yep. Okay.
So I can wheel
because
it
the
around
weight of
when
it
I need
and-
the space to photograph or whatever, because it's too heavy to carry.
But in terms of the the color choices, what's the
As
what's the
natural
thinking?
as possible, as close to black and white, so
Mm-hmm.
it does not interfere with anything that you do in the sculpture itself.
Okay. What about this work over here? Talk about this a little bit.
Okay. Well, once a year we go shopping for stones in New York.
Yeah.
There used to be 3 international import houses, one in Escalante, California, one in Miami Beach, and one in New York. Now only New York is left because everybody is going bankrupt. There are not enough carvers.
Yep. And that's the place where we went the last time we were in New York.
Yeah.
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 You, Chris, and I.
So you find something that you respond to. Again, it does not look like this. It looks very ugly, but they sell it. It is white, translucent, alabaster. So you have to go with that. And then you send it and file it. What I wanted to do, it was pretty pure, only changes of coloration on the edges. That is fine. And I like the rough edges, because I wanted this translucency. You can see the hand through it. You can see anything happening. So I love that translucency of the stone. And with its veins, it is still alive. Some of these things, there were imperfections. So you choose your lines depending on how pure the shapes, how pure the material is, how deep you can go, how many shadows you can make, and how thin you can get. So it's a challenge, again, of material, of forms that it will accept, and that you as the artist can accept as visually beautiful.
How do you know when to stop?
Hopefully before you wreck it.
I'm sure there have been times when you've done one chisel too far, right?
Yeah. In any of them, they're very fragile.
Yeah.
You can make the wrong move and it
Yeah.
shatters. You can go through.
Yep.
But since it is a slow process, it's all filing, you feel your way and you try to work with the light that it creates, or that you hope it will create.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, we talked earlier that you made initial selections of work of yours and Julian's to send here, and the curators made the subset selections and also the placement.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me how they've placed this next to these drawings by Julian.
yeah.
Perhaps you can talk
Yeah.
about the drawing and then maybe the relationship,
Well,
if any.
why don't you talk about you had not seen them before?
I really hadn't, or hadn't
Yeah.
seen them very
No.
much before.
No.
Well, first of all, I've always found it interesting, and I know you and Jenny have been talking about this and this concept, but what Julian calls a drawing, many other people on the planet wouldn't describe as a drawing, because when they think of a drawing, it's graphite pencil on paper, and this is it says drawing on plastic, but it's not. I mean, what's the material in here?
It is spray paint.
Yep, so spray paint on plastic. So a
Yeah.
lot of people would consider this to be a painting, and it's been interesting to me. But I think what you had said, at least the latest that you said to Jenny, was that Julian called them drawings because line action is the primary activity.
Correct.
But if that's the case, there's other works like some of the constellations that are, it's line activity first and
No,
foremost.
but there's color in them.
Not always, sometimes black and white. Yep,
Well,
yep. So,
But-
but I'm curious as to how this concept of these being called drawings came about.
okay. Let me first go into the process.
Okay.
Julian made large drawings because he wanted them to be large.
Yep.
Paper in the 70s was only, I think, 24 inches maximum. So in both his prints and his drawings, he wanted them 30 inches, 40 inches. He wanted more impact. That's why the choice of plastic. For better or worse, plastic will sooner or later deteriorate, but so does paper. It will yellow and has its own built-in fragility. Right. But scale was the first thing that was important. These were in the drawers because of their fragility, but I got them out because I wanted to see them and I wanted to frame them, to keep them in the frames. And it's non-reflect, or it's glass that is
relatively non-reflective.
Yeah.
Hey, Barbara, can I interrupt with a question? I know when Dee Dee Wigmore did the show that kind of new materials or plastics and other kinds of things, she was really intrigued, and Emily's essay I think really dealt a lot with the use of those kind of new materials that were really coming online in the 60s and early 70s, and that at least many of the artists in her show were using those materials as part of the advance of the new. Is there any element of that in Julian's work, or was it just plastic?
No,
It really wasn't that.
Had a very different reason.
Yep.
And the other reason was you cannot use tape. His work works when you have straight, perfect lines.
Yep.
As soon as you have imperfections, your statement is muddled.
Yeah, because you start noticing the imperfection. It's like everything can be,
Yeah.
you could have fantastic wallpaper, but the
Right.
one little thing that's
Yeah.
only off by
That's right.
a 30 seconds of an inch is the
Yeah.
thing your eye goes to.
Correct.
Right.
So in order to get the totality to work instead of the peculiarities and accidents, on paper you cannot use tape. It would pull off
Yep.
the fiber
Yep.
of the paper.
Yep.
So on plastic, he could tape it out, a very similar process than on his paintings, and spray paint the whole thing.
Yep.
Some of them, very few of them, he painted, but the paint on plastic is very crackly.
Yep.
It can flake off because
Yep.
plastic is a certain slick surface.
Yep.
So the spray paint has a better adhesion to it, and it's a very thin film,
Yep.
and you could still remove
Yeah,
the tape.
but just to clarify, in terms of spray paint was done with these drawings on plastic,
Yeah.
but the
No,
painting on the canvas are not at all.
right. No,
Yeah.
no,
Those
because
that's
on
applied
canvas.
physically by hand.
Yes, many
Right.
coats,
Yeah,
many
yeah.
coats. But plastic, again, you have to zoom into what the material can do.
One of the things that's interesting about this too is that there actually are pencil drawings
Yes,
that are underneath
yes,
it with
yes.
different shape
Yeah.
coming down. Were
Yeah.
those just different choices, and he ended up with these choices, or how did it?
You can, again, in most of his drawings, he has the lines underneath. And as a photograph...
It would have
it's-
been drawn by hand.
Yeah,
I mean, these
yeah,
are without,
yeah,
Yeah.
That's why he wanted this and this wiggle. If later on he taped it that way, no, we went into different
kind of wiggle.
configuration.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's interesting too, because the ones that are hand drawn on here that you still see remnants of tend to have
the more of the thin and
thinner,
thick. Yeah.
the thinner edges than what he generally ended
Yeah.
up with in this particular
Again, when you
work.
step away, you can see that there are wider bands that form bands in themselves that wiggle through.
Yep.
And only through the offset of line do you have the shape reading.
Yep.
There is no line going here, but the edge
creates
creates
the perception, the
makes it a shape.
gestalt
Yeah,
perception
yeah,
of a line.
yeah.
Barbara, obviously, again, you weren't the curator for the
No.
exhibition, but this work is placed in relation to that work, and there certainly are some similarities. So why don't you come here and talk with me about some of whether you think, are there any relationships between those two, or is it just more
Just
of a
because
surface reading?
A surface
reading, okay.
It's line, it's curvilinear.
Yep, okay.
This
But
has a very different action,
Yeah.
and it has to be active. It
Yep.
has to be humming, zooming. It has to bounce.
Yep.
This doesn't.
Yep.
But you still see the shapes. You see it in white and in off-white. So
Yep.
it's very subtle, but
Yep.
they're curves. And
Yep.
in a way, it expands the understanding of curve.
Yeah, one of the
as
things,
others might expand the understanding of circularity.
yeah, again, one of the things I love about things like that, I mean, back when I first got involved in some way in the art world, I thought my job as the viewer was to understand the artist's intentions, and that the artist's intentions were the final read of the work. And as I've been involved in the world more, I think the artist's understanding of their own work is really important, but it's not the only thing, because as a viewer, I can look at it and with a different intention than yours, can still take something from it that's very meaningful to me, even if it's different than the statement that you were thinking of as you were making it.
Yeah. Julian never was interested in him. He did it because he had the vision and it was sort of a must. He was compelled to execute it.
Yep.
But his priority was always the viewer, and how to feed the viewer a different vision, let him see and experience something else.
Yep. Which then comes back to the conversation we had earlier today, where you were talking about how Julian, left to his own preferences, would have had just color presentation first, without necessarily without a shape attached to it, other than needing to contain the color in some form, but understanding that the viewer needs an entry point into it.
Yes, correct.
Right. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that in your work, the curvilinear nature of it is really a response to the underlying material and what's in the underlying material, whereas Julian, not having an underlying material that's got curvilinear, could be anything. He has to bring that and project that onto the surface. Is that fair, not fair?
In a way, I decided to make curves in here. I could have decided something else. But the fragility of the light and the material, how the light is suspended in the material, doesn't want to be straight linear. It doesn't want to be geometric. It wants to flow. So you respond to the material, but you have a leadway. What you want to do with it? It's not,
I clearly understand that, but you can't. But you couldn't turn this. I mean, without superimposing your will on it. I mean, while still being responsive to the material, you couldn't just put this as, for example, your red grid over there. I mean, whereas Julian could have put the freedom to put the red grid on this,
Correct. Mine is a dialogue. It's a cooperation.
Yep.
While Julian is single-minded output with clarity. Mine is give and take and give and take and give and take.
And his give and take with the materials, in his instance, the color and the pigments, is making sure that he can adjust the materials to achieve what he wants to achieve.
Correct.
Whereas yours is a dialogue and saying, okay,
I go
Mr. and Mrs. Material, this is what I'd like to do. And the material says, yep, that works, or no, I think we should go a different
only
direction.
so far, and let's
How
try
about
it
this instead? And you're thinking, I could maybe do that.
That's exactly. It talks back to you.
Yep.
It's a continuous conversation, respectful conversation. Because without respect for one another, without respect for the material, nothing would happen.
Yep. I've seen these in reproduction. I mean, I'm obviously very familiar with the archive, and so I've seen the works, but I had not physically seen them until they were here when I came for the opening. Julian, it has an interest, I guess, I don't even know quite how to say this. I think Julian's work has a really interesting relationship to minimalism.
Yes, very much so.
In that, if one kind of lists off goes to the art history books and lists off the characteristics of minimalism, you could go down Julian's work and check, yep, it's all there. But at the same time, Julian's work feels in many ways so radically different than what people think of as minimalist work.
Correct.
This series of four, though, matches in a way that's really quite interesting to me, because it's the same, if I'm reading it right, it's really the same underlying shift of color, this done as a grid, this done as just the vertical lines, this done with dots, circles, and this putting together the grid and the circles in
Correct.
those ways. So it's
Correct.
very much almost like a soloid, or somebody else would
Correct.
say, I'm doing this,
Correct.
this sequencing.
Correct.
Is it just in my own mind that this is kind of an anomaly in Julian's work, and the other ones actually do the same? Is it, or it's more transparent here, or what's your reaction to what I just said about it?
As you know from the archives, I put it aside. I need it for the archives to be there to explain Julian's thinking. The layering of thought is in every painting. There is one skeleton, another one on top, another layer of paint, another layer of shifting squares or whatever. So the layering is typical for him. But here he kept the layering separately. And in a way, it probably was me who said, stop, that's it, no more, as I did with several other paintings. I wanted to hold on to what was instead of the one more elaborate final thing. But another thing Julian always said, want to be with the in agreement with the minimalist. So two things. He said, if I had more time, I would be a minimalist, because you have to throw out a lot. The other thing is as simple as possible, but not simpler.
Yep.
So there has to be something
Right.
to hold on to, but you don't want to crowd. You don't want to make just one painting and put everything in it. You want to present and give and share this one thought, and this other thought, and this other thought. In this one, I think he saw the totality, but it took some daring to leave it this way.
You know, it's actually interesting for me to think of it that way. I really hadn't. But I can see if there are a number of paintings, particularly the ones that are like 3 and 4 layers as opposed to 2-layer paintings. If you were to take a snapshot of each just layer, which again the way Julian would work, you mask it out, you tape it, pull the mask off, and that's what you see, and then you got to mask it up again and and paint it again, and you don't see it until the end. Somehow, as you were describing, I was thinking there's this Matisse painting, I think it's the Blue Nude, but it's part of the Cone collection in Baltimore, where they've got snapshots of the painting in multiple layers, multiple iterations before the final.
I should have done that.
I was getting ready to ask, did you ever?
I had
of
thought about
maskings?
it. Julian did not want to be bothered. He wants his thought, don't bother me. So I always was there, but I did not disturb him. I always wanted him to have the freedom to do his paintings. But at times I would say, leave it.
Well,
That's it, especially the one
painting,
painting,
that's it. I know.
That was let's eat. You are not going to go back to that. That's mine.
Yep. Now the question that I have is related to that, but a little bit different. I'm curious as to whether you ever took photographs.
No, I should have.
No, I'm not saying whether you should have or not. I'm just curious
I
as to
would
whether you
have
did.
liked to see that again for the art historical or archival purposes, but I don't enter to disturb him. So put it aside, let me get a snapshot. It would have bothered him.
Yeah, but where we do have some evidence of that, either would be paintings that he did but wasn't entirely happy with and set aside, and then came back to it later, and we may have occasionally some photographs of the earlier version, or we can just see the ones that were kind of in process before. This idea of groupings of these 16 by 16 inch panels into constellations. I remember going to your studio up to visit you in the year, I don't know, probably right around 2000. And I remember before I came up, you said, Neil, I got to tell you, there's an unbelievable thing going on that Julian's working on. It's going to be in the studio when you come in. I think it was actually when I did the interviews of Julian 2001 or so. But you just said, I think these are fantastic, but I'm curious to get, Neil, your reaction to it. And I walked in and it was the Windows to the Past was up there, that 50 panels, which I think were probably 60 panels at the time. How did that whole concept of doing constellations come about?
You're a body besides being a mind. So he realized he could not do the big paintings anymore.
Yep.
He had a lot of back problems all his life, and to lean over was difficult. And in some of the other ones, big paintings, it would involve me
Yep.
taking the other side of the tape as
Yep.
laying down, and he didn't want to impinge on my time.
Yep.
So he decided to make many little ones into one big one.
Yep.
And he could sit down while doing it because he could reach across. And again, if you listen to your body and your mind, you come up with solutions that you perhaps had not thought about.
Yep.
And I think it was a very happy push that the body said, you can't do it, do something else. And he sort of invented that. Then there, on the art market, I see other people doing the same, either in imitation or perhaps the same mindset of having variety within it, and yet it's one thought that encompasses the totality.
Yeah, and it was interesting too with Windows to the Past when it first, I mean, for that particular painting, it's 50 panels, but it's not, there was not a prescribed sequence in the way they would be hung, at least initially.
Not in the beginning.
Yeah, for that painting in particular, Julian said, I wanted to leave it up to curatorial choice.
Yeah. Or take it the way it comes out of the box.
Yeah, whichever way. But I'm curious. But now, obviously, the ones after that really were much more sequenced.
Yeah. Again, I'm the designer. I like playing with the things, and I would arrange them. Then the grandchildren would come and rearrange it, and then I arrange it. And depending on how you feel, you might have another idea where the warmth and the cools, or the sharp shapes and the softer shapes should be. I like it because, again, you can spend time here. These are like crinkled material, and still it's one line from top to bottom, one line from top to bottom, no interruption. But it does something to the surface. It almost makes it physically appear to be upset physically. It is wrinkled.
It creates an image, feeling that this is a drawn line when it's not a drawn line. Much the same as the drawing we just left has that feeling of this drawn shape that's really not a drawn shape.
If these are the shapes that he was interested in. It's the line going in and the line spilling out. So it totally upsets the surface, and you have condensations and you have wide spread of taping because you want to come to a point there. They look so easy. They are not easy at all to have them all come out evenly.
At the top, after going through all these,
acrobacies in the middle. Sometimes drove him nuts because he's missing one. Where did that stop?
So the other thing that's been interesting to me about this type in particular, whether this or these, is that we were talking about the concept of drawings. In many ways, the physical activity involved in making these is actually almost identical to a drawing, other than he's laying tape as opposed to writing with with graphite. But it's the same. It's the same gestural move. I mean, the same.
It is.
Move.
It is. They do exist because of the line and what the performance of the line.
Yeah, but even more than just the performance of the line, I'm just saying the physical activity. I mean, like to make a drawing of this line, you would have to take a pencil and come and cut it in and cut. I mean, you have to do the exact same thing that here he's doing with tape. So it's the same. The physical process is really identical to creating a drawing as well.
Yes. Could be done. Could be done on plastic and then with pipe paint, and it would be a drawing.
Barbara, this is a painting. I mean, my involvement with Julian's work. I first saw the show at Charles Foley. I don't even think it was a show. I think there was just work in the gallery, and I saw it and was immediately struck by it. It kind of reminded me of stained glass, medieval churches, is what I was thinking. Then Julian had a show up at what is now the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland. I think it was the New Gallery at the time. And there were a number of paintings in that show that I distinctly remember, one of which is this one, Environmental. I've got my own thoughts about it, but before I share my thoughts, I'd like to have you perhaps talk about the painting. Because we both were remarking that it's really a remarkable painting.
Yeah. It combines many qualities of the crinkled surface together with the transparencies. The lines could be a transparency. Something is happening in space. Folding backwards, folding forward. Those are the clues that the lines give you, especially because of the diagonals. To a certain degree, it is reinforced with the value changes from dark to light. But then when you come closer and see, and again, value creates shape and it creates space. Where are they in space? Darks recedes, lights come forward. But then you see, hey, the light is coming forward, but it is meeting a dark. How do I reconcile that in my mind? Plus the line continues, the diagonal continues. So it is folding, but the colors aren't folding. So it is clashing and it's confusing the hell out of you. Plus the drawing is illogical. Where does this shape continue in here? Which part is what? How are they physically oriented? It doesn't have a real substance of shapes. This illogic attracts me personally terribly because I want to play back and forth. Here it's going, there it's shifting, there it's, what is the distance that it is folding? This participation in time with playing with the shapes and the colors in it. But then you come closer and you see three colors. You have the warm colors and two cool colors. You have the warm color and two cool colors, changing value. Three colors in fusion as you're stepping back. From close, there are three colors. From here, they fuse into a new entity. And again, that's what Julian would call the meltdown of the individual substance for the sake of the totality. Dramatic.
When I was involved, curated the color function painting exhibition and then did the catalog, the really famed colorist, color scientist, Floyd Ratliff, was writing the lead essay in the catalog, and this was one of the paintings I wanted to write about. And he told me it was one of the most remarkable paintings he's ever seen in his life. Just from a pure color science point of view, which I know is completely different than the way Julian would think. But he would just kept saying...
Not totally.
No, but
there
Floyd,
is a science behind it, but there's also an emotion and a vision behind it.
But Floyd just kept saying that the intensity of the colors, at a close range and how you almost can't focus on anything because of the vibrancy of it. But then as you start stepping back and it fuses and the hues tend to submerge and become overtaken by the value shifts, which creates that kind of feeling of a grayness to it, kind of this haze. But that's when the folding shape really starts to come out, is from a distance. I've forgotten now, but there were either 3 or 4 major color science activities that he said are going on simultaneously in this painting. And he said, I've never seen a painting do that. He was blown away by it, just absolutely blown away by it. And I think you talked about drives your mind crazy as hell. It's also beautiful as hell, too.
Yeah, because you want to stay with it. You want that activity to continue. It's a performing for you. And Julian also liked the word metamorphosis. It has to metamorphosize, change, be something else in order to become a totality and give up its individuality.
Well, and this one is, using that word of metamorphosis too, this is interesting because not only, a lot of Julian's paintings will metamorphosize so that create that color meltdown, so that the individual color constituents lose their individualness and become a unity, but they tend to do that in different ways when you're up close from a distance, but they tend to do that. But this one metamorphosizes differently at this distance, than at this distance, than at this distance, than at this. So each one of those different distances creates a different metamorphosis relative to that painting. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So hold on to it, take good care of it.
So I think, Barbara, you said you wanted to talk about these next?
Yeah.
Or when we say these, it's one painting it's a triptych.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
one painting.
It's the first time that I see them arranged on a flat wall.
Well, it's the first time I've seen them with distance between them, because
Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
really think of them as a budding and almost three panels
Correct.
of one
I've
large
seen them
painting.
budding together, and each time I have seen them, they were in a corner. That's the way yeah, which is very different than seeing them as individual entities, the greenish, the bluish purple, and the reddish purple. Yep. Now they're individuals. If you put them together, the lines, it's like the light is shifting through the trees, and it's coming with the green first, but then to the blues, and then to the reds, the warmth enters into it. It's the shifting light. And I tried to think about this at night. How come that we think of this diagonal as if the steps are going, changing their relationship? They're not changing their relationship. It's the value changes that make you do the shift. Yes, there are diagonals here, but they're much softer than the value changes within these bars that are moving. Again, when they get close value, you almost lose the shape consciousness, and here you have your strict division and bar reading. In space, where are they? Here they are, and then they diminish. But besides diminishing and fusing and becoming hazy, they also shift, and that is crazy.
So are these two pure reversals, or are they not?
Let me see. There might be.
I almost think it has to be not
There
quite,
might be,
because to be able because I don't think they're always in steps of two. I think each, it's almost like a pure reversal, but this one is still slightly greener, going this way as you shift.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think they're all different. I
think they are all different, but they have a feeling almost as if this
they're
reversal,
pairs.
that they're pairs.
Yeah.
But they're probably not, because otherwise they would be more abrupt in
Yeah.
terms of those
Yeah.
shifts down in
Yeah.
pairs.
But this loss of shape in the middle is always beautiful when they have an equal value. That's what I like about this painting with the bands.
Yep.
How come you see it and then you don't see it?
Yep.
It's real and structured.
Yeah, then it disappears.
And it disappears. It
Yep.
becomes haze. It becomes effervescent. It becomes ephemeral, untouchable, untangible.
Yep.
And nobody could mix colors. So many different colors.
Well, and again, just to be able to do it so that each one of these bars, which I do think each one is
It's
different.
different, yeah.
But then as each one's, they have to be different in equal steps so that you're going to be able to make it in three.
Yeah.
And actually then this almost kind of reverses around.
Almost, so you can put that one back there.
If you
and
could.
You could put it in
Yeah.
a circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, with this really being horizontal line oriented in terms of vertical.
With the diagonal there.
Well, yeah, horizontal and diagonal. Did you talked about this one, and again with that, we were really talking about the hazing in the center.
Again, you have your, let's say, 20 colors or so that are mixed value in equal value steps, but where they meet other equal values, you lose the shape and form and the coloration, the haze, the meltdown happens from the shape.
Much like that yellow painting we talked about on the edges where the yellow and the white instant.
So to be able to control in your mixing and in your going through the steps of what you want, reaching for that ultimate aim that you're envisioning, and breaking it down into the parts and attending to each part. Let's see, all three bars are different. Yes, they mirror one another, so three are mixture, but there must be at least 10, 12, 14 steps of each of those progressions. In color theory, you learn about those things, but to make it happen, it's not anymore theory, it's experience.
The other thing too, people always, when they look at Julian's work, a question that often gets asked is, how long does it take to make a painting?
Uh-huh.
And Julian will always say, well, the hardest part was actually really the conceptualizing of it, and sometimes
the
that could take
clarity.
months, sometimes that could take nanoseconds, because ideas pop in the mind. And the second thing would be to do those
Mixing
color
of the
mixtures,
colors,
which would
yeah.
take
He
a
would
really
get,
long
he would
time.
get very frustrated
Yep.
because just one step less equidistant.
Yep.
like when the
Yeah, go
steps
upstairs, you
are-
notice it, even if it's only 1/8 of an inch off, you notice it when
will-
you're going up and
you
down steps.
won't have that flow.
Yep.
It will look artificial.
Yep.
And other people think it is spray painted.
Yep.
It's not. Each paint is separately chosen and suffered for
Yep.
to get that right.
Yep. But once you did once Julian did the conceptualizing and then the color mixing, how long would it take for a painting like this to physically lay the tape, physically paint it? I mean, is that a
There are
is that a
lot
10-hour
of
project? Is that a 1-week project? Is that
more a 10-hour project because
because you got to do it quickly?
you have to do it quickly depending on the humidity in the room.
Yep.
If it is in summer and it's relatively warm, you have more humidity and you can work a little bit slower.
Yep.
When there's dry heat,
Yep.
the paint dries and it dries to the edges of the tape and it is very hard to remove it. When it's too warm, it stretches. And when it's too cool or too hard dried,
Yep.
it will crackle, and you
Yep.
don't have a neat edge.
Yep.
So again, you have to be in control of your environment.
Yep.
So when he is in the process, you don't disturb him because he has to carry it through. This painting is from 1951. Julian had just come to America, to Cleveland. This was where they were living. You saw all the smoke chimneys where the smeltering was going on, almost fires at night because they did a lot of the smeltering at night. So his neighborhood was a pretty poor Polish neighborhood, hard workers, steel workers. But Julian already looked not only to represent, but to break up the representation into shapes, into units. There's not one red painted, but it is a lighter, a darker, and muddier. The chimneys themselves are made out of different shapes and angles. Perhaps nature still gave him an impetus to create a shape like that, but it is no longer reality. It is already transformed. It already breaks into units of darks and lights, of colors against perhaps non-colors. And I think it's very important to see that even before he went to CIA, he already knew he wanted to deal with color and he wanted to fragment reality, not just represent it, but give you a feeling, a response as you are looking at it, personalizing it.
When Julian would look back at this painting 60, 70 years after it was made, what would be his reaction to it?
I don't know.
Yeah, because
I
I mean,
might
it's been in
have
shows
a-
before. I was just curious if he ever thought about, or talked about his early work in some way.
No, he talked about this little guy
Yep, in relation to Paul Klee.
to Paul Klee,
Yep.
because one of the artists he really liked was Paul Klee, who dealt with dream landscapes, and Julian loved landscape. It was contained in shape, action, and color relationship. So there was a mutual understanding. He knew what Paul Klee was doing, why he was doing it. He understood his decision making. He was too poor to buy any colors, so this is going to the different rooms and sweeping up the stuff on the floor, especially in the ceramics department.
Yep.
But again, the breakup is Paul Klee, but the breakup is Julian too.
Yep.
This identity of not one color, but color in proportion and color against color.
Well, what's actually interesting too for
To
me is
having the linear,
yeah,
the line,
yeah,
very much.
which is really not Paul Klee at all.
No, which is Maccarelli, but this
Exactly.
is 57.
Yeah.
So yes, he already worked with Maccarelli. Don't have one of those paintings, but yes, the outline. Oh, that one. That is definitely Maccarelli's influence. This is Africa,
Yeah.
reminiscence of the savannah.
Yep.
The different emulsions that they use for starching men's shirts or convertibles. So that was more the beginnings of the acrylics, which
Yep.
was at that time called Ruplex.
Yeah, because he was involved really in the development
With the
of acrylics.
development, yeah, worked with permanent pigments, or permanent pigment sought him out because, for example, permanent pigment could not contain a purple, alizarin crimson in tubes. It would explode. So
But Julian was able to use it.
Julian was able to use it and make them. He would put the dry powder in alcohol overnight, so it could lose its
Explosive.
whatever,
Right.
and then they could use it, and then he could use it.
Yeah.
But one can see the many layers, many of them applied with palette knife,
Yep.
searching for form, again, simplicity and yet color action.
Yep.
How different spacing creates a different coloration and density, how the surprise of the changing color and the changing
Yeah.
width
Again, I've seen
comes
this in
to different.
reproduction a lot. I've seen it live maybe once before, but I didn't really remember these bars shifting in color as they do here at the edges,
Here too.
which are really, I know, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. The talk about, I know this one's made before the use of tape.
Yeah.
Talk about which I know the shift to tape you started, I think, in 1965.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, I've heard Julian talk about it. I'm curious your reaction to that. Kind of what prompted it, what you think was gained by it, if you think anything was lost by it.
Again, these ones are done on a plate of glass. You're grinding the dry pigment with the mediums and with the mixtures to make it a cream-like substance, and then you apply it with the palette knife. If you look against the light, you can see all the glitter that is mica in there in the mixtures.
Wow.
That makes that, especially when you are applying it with a palette knife, so it is a straight surface instead of a brushed surface.
Yep.
And here, yes, he didn't have tape, but he wanted straight edges. Yes, he used
Exactly.
a palette knife. It's very difficult to keep the edge straight from both sides and still have the surface straight.
Yep.
It takes dexterity
Yep.
and patience, and again, the vision, the need, it has to be this way.
Yep.
So that's why you're doing it. But I like these early paintings because they're such evidence of his desire to have the color interaction, as little shape as possible, or shape so open that it can be anything that you can imagine it to be, so somebody else can enter with their needs, wants. And yet, they're Julian. They're his need, his vision, his temptation, what color can do.
And creating very different color environments and
Yeah.
emotional environments.
This is totally different.
Yep.
It almost reminds me of an Indian blanket
Yep.
because of the richness of color.
And the feeling of kind of overlapping in there too. Like you look at these edges, it's almost, you know, today in computer world, you almost think of like computer pages open that are scoped there on the edge. Obviously, that concept didn't even exist. But you still have that feeling of flatness, but also that,
Of the
that
illusion
overlapping
of
or
depth.
of layering.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah. And if we just shortly look at this, is definitely for me the influence of Macchiarelli.
Yep.
So Macchiarelli would draw
Even with a human figure, really, ultimately.
the figure
it's
is there, reclining,
Yep.
and okay, you can see perhaps a head or boobs, and,
Yep.
but then you let go of that.
Yep.
That's not important anymore what it is, that it is a figure. What's important, or where that figure is, it's the texture of one, the solidity of another, the indication of line, shape, surface, interacting, that is by far more important than the subject matter. But what always amazed me is the placement of his blacks, of the holes that he creates and how irregular those holes are, and they keep it all together. It's just so daring.
And again, these two really being black and this really
it's
being
a
more
bit
of a really
grayish.
dark gray.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I see again the pumice in here.
Yeah,
You see
yeah.
the
glitter.
sparkles, the
Yeah.
glitter in it. It's throughout, which is really quite.
Yeah, I'm glad
Amazing.
I have those.
Yep.
This one is from 58, so it is right after Julian got his first teaching job at the Cincinnati. So he had his own studio that they provided in school. He's doing the same thing, except now he's starting to activate the surfaces. That was very subtle differences that he applied with the palette knife. These are still palette knife applications of the ground color, but then the action of what happens if you put dots of the opposing color. What happens if you put dots of
A different value.
Of different value and
Right.
of different color relationship. Is it complementary? Is it adjacent? And what they do. Even the different kind of dots and circles.
Yeah, and the ones that here have like these are
these
little donuts.
circles.
Yep.
And how they group and activate themselves into configurations and actions and movements.
Yeah, this has some of the feeling of Aboriginal painting too.
Very
was
much.
Julian aware
If you
of that at the time?
No,
Probably
no.
not. Yeah.
That came up when Christopher and I saw a show with the Aboriginal paintings. Just amazing similarity
Yep.
of needing action, but don't want to overactivate.
Yep.
You still want the mood to be prevailing and nature to be respected or evoked.
Yep.
So that's his tree. It's not a tree, and yet it is a tree.
Right.
So. and
Barbara,
the-
what I find, one of the things I want to mention at first, they have on this pedestals, please do not touch. And I think this one's you probably don't want people to touch, maybe. But for most of yours, I had friends who were here and they said, I want to touch it, I want to touch it. I
Yeah.
kind of whispered, Barbara would actually say, please
Matter
don't.
of fact, I have a photograph of somebody when they didn't have this pedestal. The pedestal keeps you
Yep.
embracing it.
Yeah, just
And
hugging it, hugging the
it.
tree
Yeah,
hugger.
Yeah. And I photographed her because that reaction is what I want. I don't
Yep.
want this pristine, don't touch me.
Yep.
It's nice the way they lit it because you have so many shadows, so much in and out
Yep.
and surface. And they did a nice job at it. And Julian did a wonderful job with the bases.
Yep. Yeah, the
Because
bases are really, what's
the-
interesting too, these being, this is cypress, right?
Yeah.
Yep, so you have
No,
these
it's cedar.
cedar. But you've got this, purely organic form, and then also made out of wood is this, very,
But very light, see-through.
exactly,
And
exactly.
it's on a metal post,
Yep.
but it has a rubber lining, like an aquarium tube, so that it always will go back to its position. So I thank Julian for that.
Yep.
But his brother got me the cypress knees. They grow in the swamps in Florida, upside down,
Yep.
naturally,
Yep.
in the muck.
Yep.
When you get them, they are black and ugly and stinking and
Yep.
decomposing. And when you want to carve them, you can't carve them. You have to peel them like onions. They're very weird, very weird. So all these things, again, are filed.
And they are cypress, not cedar.
They're cypress.
Yeah.
Cypress knees, they
Yep.
call them.
Yep.
But something was given to me, so I deal with it.
Sure.
It's
Not going to waste.
learning.
You're not going to waste an interesting material.
That's exactly. And their basic form is always a small tip on the bottom,
Yep.
and then spreading out. All this would be underwater.
Yep.
So that's why they are so saturated with moisture.
Yep.
But after drying them up and peeling and peeling and peeling and sanding, I started drilling into them some openings to make them individually alive and yet as a grouping work together.
And this is one work?
This is one
work.
Mm-hmm.
And what was is it just because you had 5, or what was your thinking of them having this particular constellation as one work, as opposed to 3 or 7 or 9 or?
He only brought me 5.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there are different ideas of what they could be
Yep,
in
right.
Mother Nature.
Right.
They have so much character in their thickness or thinness, elegance or complexity that they give to one another, they need one another.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before that Julian had said you're not a colorist,
Yeah.
Shape is your primary thing,
Yeah.
stick to shape. I'm curious, how much did the two of you as artists living together, how much did the two of you comment on each other's work?
Always.
Critique, pray, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what?
Be excited, be expecting
Yeah.
of removing that tape together and seeing it and then say, it works. Oh, whoosh.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, do it
Yeah.
again.
Yep.
But the excitement of being there for one another and sharing in the vision.
Yep.
And Julian being helpful, he would love to have been a sculptor. I said there's one sculpture at home where after I came back from school he had drilled, 50 holes into it.
Yep.
And because he wanted to participate, but
Well, and his
physically
family
he
was involved in
couldn't.
woodworking
Yeah,
and
yeah.
doing
But he
things.
couldn't,
Yeah.
so
Because of the arm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So having me as an escape
Yep.
worked out very good. As soon
Yep.
as I had decided to be three-dimensional.
So you had the conversations together, commenting on each other's
Yeah.
work, being there to share the excitement.
Yeah.
Did you always agree? Did you
No.
sometimes, what would be some examples of, or even just kinds of things where you might have different views?
Or things that might have worked out better than others. I know Julian would not have liked that piece that is between the two paintings there. There are too many pieces. He always wanted me to be simpler.
The one on
Yeah.
the tall
Yeah,
pedestal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was using the pieces that I had left over.
To the extent that Julian would critique the work, one example he would give would be of things where you had too many things going on.
Too many things going on.
But in his mind,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
may or may not be
Yeah.
actually too many things going on. But you said that he always loved
He loved
the translucent.
the translucent things,
Yeah.
also some of the wood pieces.
Yep.
But that's the first time that I see them exhibited separate, the
Yep.
two pieces.
Yep, 'cause I always thought of them as
because
one
they
unit as well.
They are echoing one
Yep.
another's. The
Yeah, normally
round
this is on
continues.
this side
Yeah,
over here.
correct. But the way they lit it is very beautiful because it shows what I was after. The glowing stone and just like the script, like leaving the mark
Yep.
on it, or like the halo standing out and shifting in its diagonal quality. The light changes. So you have the full moon and the crescent moon, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
So again, sometimes the idea works immediately, clearly, but sometimes the idea is confused, like on that one. There are too many things.
Yeah, that one's not my favorite. of
Yeah,
yours.
it's too many ideas in one.
Yep.
So the singularity of the idea. Here are 4 more pieces of the cedars.
Which I love. One of the things I like about this too are just the shadows.
Yeah, yeah. Any way that you put it, the play of shadows is pretty dramatic. And again, how I got to it was I loved the exterior shape, but you can't carve into it. So I had to saw into it, drill and saw, which brings out very different forms. but then you want to accentuate the forms, giving them individuality, but yet letting them need one another
Yep.
to be fulfilled.
And another one of the few examples where you've painted the wood as well.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah,
yeah.
because
Just activated differently in a way.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
You want to accentuate the shapes in this because the perimeter is so active.
Yep.
You have to have something else.
To activate the interior
Yeah.
as well to
Yeah.
kind of draw
Yeah.
that in.
Yeah. So those ones are successful. That's when I'm doubting a little bit. Julian built this base too. The only thing I liked about it, when I was photographing it, there was a head right next to this. And it's just, the scale is pretty amazing. What was the idea here? This is one piece. People look, did she glue it on? No, it's nothing glued on. This is the inner bulk, and that is the heartwood. And you can have 3 different colorations within one piece if you watch carefully the layering of the colors.
One of my favorite stories of all time with you guys was when Julian was named one of Cleveland's 10 most important people to watch. And it was the same year that Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball player, was
One
in
of
it.
them, yeah.
Was one of it. And seeing Julian and
Yeah.
Shaquille together and talking. But you have Shaquille here and put his hand on it, it'd be like a basketball.
You can lean his arm on it. So the scale.
Yep.
Julian always loved this one.
Yeah. And again, I
because
always
of
see it in the
play.
window with the
Yeah.
light coming in this way. It's
Yeah.
interesting for me
Yeah.
to see the
Yeah.
light coming down
Come from top.
from top.
And again, sometimes you need many pieces of shifting light
Yep.
and forms, and I like that. This one was interesting because whoever saw a piece of wood that crazy,
Yep.
and I saw it in the tree, and I told the Italian guys that I need that when you cut the tree down. Well, he forgot about me. This was years later, but I would bicycle by and check on the tree. One time I found it in the garbage and took it on my shoulder on the bicycle and took it home. And I immediately had an idea what to do with it, to show it in its weirdness of shape, pure, but to let other things interact with it. So you have the diagonal and vertical shifting, the color action, again, the exterior, this is called the interior bulk, and the heartwood, the color relationship, also from light to dark red, purple.
But what's interesting for me, having you describe it, because I mean, I've seen this piece a number of times before, and I don't really focus on that. I focus on these planes instead. So it's just interesting. You were talking before, saying how you and I, one of the things that could make this conversation interesting is that we approach it in different ways. So for you as the maker, the whole idea started with this piece of wood that I'm thinking really as more just a supporting structure for the for the other things that are there.
Whatever place it assumes is out of my responsibility. But the fascination with this doesn't happen. A tree doesn't make a curve like that.
Right.
Like our Crooked River, the Cuyahoga,
Yeah.
starting and ending almost in the same place. Crazy.
Yep. Yep.
And this one, it's just so crazy a shape, and I love interacting with it. Yeah.
One of the things you talked about when we had the conversation here with Charles is you said that you love, I forgot what it was like discarded, distressed materials. I mean, something that's almost
discarded.
like
Nobody
discarded.
else
No one
loves
else wants it. No one else loves it. Yeah, disloved.
Unloved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there is something, like in people, there is something beautiful in everybody and everything.
Even me, right? That's what.
Even me. That you can find and bring out.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of thinking and compassion.
Yeah.
But thinking into it, what it can do, what it can offer. And then you want to share that you discovered.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yep.
So some of the pieces I'm happy with, that not only the way they are here, the way they are relating to Julian's work, but as pieces, they are solid, good, strong pieces. Other ones I'm less happy with, but most of the time I get back until it is just right. I'm a very stubborn woman.
Yeah. Good. So Barbara, talk about this. First of all, this is one work, right? Even
Yes,
though there are
this is really one half of one work.
one half of one
There are
work?
10, there are 22 together, and
Okay.
this is 10.
Yep.
But I chose these 10 because of their color and shape difference. But each one started with a tree trunk. And I wanted their difference of foam and coloration to be like little individuals, like people mixed together. The difference between oak and maple and walnut and pear, and so they are all different trees, willow, and what can they offer and what forms might they like? I liked that project. It took more than a year to make those 22 sculptures.
Is this one solid?
Yeah, it's one solid.
So
There's
these
all-
aren't. So it's not like you've carved
They're all
individually
all
and
tree
stacked them.
trunks.
Okay.
So in many of them, for example, that one, it had a lot of rot, so you
Yep.
open it up, while others you could imagine stacking or see-through or personalities or some very simple ones, because the spalding is so interesting here and you wanted to make an issue out of that. So I like them all together because they're characters, they're personalities, they're discoveries. Some are very simple and really focus on the surface of the material and the age and the aging of the material.
This tall one, the one that has had a lot of rot in it. I see
the
the
pear.
3 drilled holes on the
Yeah.
upper right. What's
What's that issue?
yeah? I'm just
I
curious if
probably-
you have
I
any
felt-
if you have any recollection of it.
No, I probably needed to get deeper and wanted a little bit of detail. And again, it's hand tools carving.
Yep.
Sometimes it's not that easy.
Yeah. No, I
Or to
can't.
keep some of these openings and not splitting
Well,
it.
Or like this one here, where each one of those individual things is then carved in.
Has a puddle in it. Mhm.
yeah.
Again, if you study nature, you find similarities
Yep.
to almost every form here in nature.
Yep. I know we've talked before about Noguchi.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any relationship in sensibility, materials, anything, or is that
I
a
love
stretch
his
for me?
work.
Yep.
Wherever I can, I track it down.
Yeah.
I have met him when he was in Cleveland installing work, and I took my class over and we talked sculpture.
Yep.
There are a lot of similarities in his sensitivity to materials and his love of nature, which both of us share.
Yeah.
Technically, naturally, he has a lot of people, had a lot of people working for him,
Yeah.
so you could split a big rock scale. I wish I could deal with that scale, but it's a humble scale.
Yeah.
It's a manageable scale for a single person. But yes, I think are kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Julian was very impressionable, especially as a teenager in Africa. And he would talk many times about the savanna grass, not only burning and making noises, but also the swaying of the grass. So for me, these became grasses. Yes, they're also lines, single lines, like a blade of grass. And if you watch the blades of grass, they also often intersect. They're not always parallel. And in painting, when the lines intersect a grid of lines, wonderful things happen. I mean, for me, the lines are almost like Halley's Comet. They leave a streak. They leave a pulsation of points that flare up. It's just a line crossing another line. The simple, the physically simple action creates so many mixtures and intersections. Or take any one of the lines and follow it through. When it is with the white or overlapping the black, so with white on each side, becomes a different red than when it is bordered by the blacks. And again, it changes because the proportion of relationship changes. It's so simple and yet so revealing, complex, wonderful when you see the action throughout. This painting is really very sparse. You can count the lines that are intersecting, but especially the black intersecting the black, it's just like a firefly. It's just beautiful the way it lights up. Very different from the green one that is, again, reminds you of rain or saturation.
The one really here on the right. Yep.
Yeah.
The grayness in it, I think, really does it. Has that feeling with it. Yep.
A saturation of something. And rain is our lines. And you see and you don't see. Here's the same thing. You see and you don't see. You don't know where it is because it moves and changes each time you change.
Yep.
That one of the three is probably my favorite because that color mixing, that these intersecting lines, especially as they're repeated, the angle is repeated, so you don't have the complete change. But here they start fusing into color, what do you call them? Color groupings, color saturation, color mist. It's just very unusual.
This is also has it's always felt to me it's much flatter somehow. I don't even know how quite to describe it. Julian's paintings are always kind of built up, and you can you can almost feel the layers if you were to put your hands across them. This one, it feels so flat, which is so fantastic. I think it's that green being maybe slightly whiter. I don't know if it's
well, there are again three colors in the background interaction. It's not just black and white, or here's also black and white, but it's green, red, and black. They fuse.
But the green being so much thicker in proportion. I mean, the green is probably 3 times as big as the red and the black combined, and so it's like 6 times
So
bigger
your
than
intersections can be bigger. They're not just spots of light, but they are
and so many
hazes.
Many of the diagonals are also that same green as the green there, so it creates. But
Yeah.
it's I've always loved that painting too.
I want to hold on to that because it's unique. Very unique and very personal. Julian's work is marvelous.
Well, as is yours. I mean, again, we'll come back to really kind of where we started. This, I mean, I know this grouping of works you said bothers you in a way because it's it doesn't cohere into one whole and one unit, but the warmth of that stone, that interaction of you dealing with nature, and really Julian dealing with nature just in
his way, absolutely.
In his way. I mean, it's really the best way to say it. We paired this one with that desert hue and the warms over there. It just, I don't know. It's a wonderful. It's a wonderful pairing, as is this show. A wonderful pairing of the two of your work.
A wonderful life, and whatever we can make continue of Julian's work and my work, that's a future for many people, hopefully, to find delight and peace. And we need some peace.
In this world particularly, it seems like it's
so you can focus on something and just let things act on you in a positive way.
So
and
Barbara,
you can touch. You can touch.
Barbara, so I want to thank you for your huge part in making this exhibition happen. I mean, Charles spoke with you about having it happen, and then you really talking about the integration of the two bodies of work. I mean, it works so well in that.
I think it's revealing, revealing of our relationship, of our sensitivities, and it's a life's work. But
it's also it's so interesting too, because obviously Julian's work and your work are different. I mean, one doesn't come in here and think of it as a one-person show. It feels like two, but it's not a forced a forced thing.
Right.
And I guess if you live together, how many years?
55 years.
Yeah, 50,
so you rub off a little bit and you share, but we are still individuals, and that is nice too. And that you let the other be the individual they're meant to be. It's important.
Before we have Jeff turn the camera off, is there anything you want to say?
No, I'm happy with the show. I'm happy with your help and with that this could become a reality. And again, I want to hold on to this experience for the archives,
Yep.
for that it can be shared and known somehow.
Yep.
How about you?
I think it's so rare. When I think of history, one of the things that's so tough, I've always been really intrigued by history and wishing, you know, you could, what it would feel like to actually be in a historic moment, because at the time history happens, we normally don't really know about it. It just happens.
History is past.
But this is a historic moment, and I think having the ability to capture you in this space and you talking about your work and Julian's work and the interaction of those works, I think is something that's really important.
Let's carry it on
Yeah.
into the future.